Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a stack of the latest research and distill the knowledge you need quickly and thoroughly.
Today's deep dive is it's absolutely crucial because we are talking about the very foundation of life on Earth, which is soil. We're going to be unpacking the core findings from the 2022 Hungarian Soil Science Itinerant Meeting.
Right.
So a really deep bench of technical papers, all focused on, how we measure, manage, and ultimately protect this resource that honestly is so often overlooked.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental topic. I mean, we spend so much time discussing the big carbon sinks, the rainforests, the deep oceans.
Sure.
But the staggering truth, and this is the piece of context that really underpins everything we're about to discuss, is that soil is our planet's single most critical carbon repository.
That's absolutely right. The numbers are they're mind-boggling. Soil holds about 2.5 times the amount of carbon that you'd find in all living vegetation across the entire planet.
2.5 times?
Yeah. And even more critically, it holds more carbon than our atmosphere and all that vegetation combined.
Wow.
So when we talk about climate change, every tiny little shift in how soil holds that carbon or how it releases it gets amplified on a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just for perspective, when soil microbes respire, when they essentially breathe,
right,
they release almost 10 times the amount of CO2 that all of our fossil fuel burning does in a single year. The stakes, they really couldn't be higher.
So, okay, our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. We're going to be analyzing source material that details soil organic carbon, or SOC, and its dynamics, especially in relation to all this climate change complexity.
And then from there, we need to evaluate the long-term, the practical results of using some of these conservation agriculture techniques on actual commercial farms.
And finally, we've got to examine this new generation of innovative, practical soil health assessment tools, the things that are being developed for, precision, data-driven management.
And to set the stage for all of this, you have to recognize the central conflict, this sort of overwhelming challenge here.
What's that?
Managing soil carbon is absolutely vital for the global carbon cycle. We know that.
Yeah.
But the actual impacts of climate change, how fast that carbon turns over, how much gets stored, it's incredibly complex, highly variable, and so localized.
So what works in one place might be a total disaster just down the road.
Exactly. What works in one valley with a certain clay content might be completely wrong 50 miles away.
Yeah.
And that's the untangling job that researchers are facing right now.
Okay, so let's start where the system is, supposed to be working naturally. On the forest floor, this is where that climate complexity really shows itself, particularly in how moisture interacts with carbon storage.
Right.
Researchers have been trying to nail down this carbon balancing act. It's basically a constant race between carbon going in and carbon breaking down.
And the basic theoretical premise is, it's straightforward on paper, but it can be really misleading. The idea is that with increasing atmospheric CO2 and, generally longer growing seasons, you should get a boost in primary production.
So more leaves, more roots, more dead stuff falling on the ground.
Exactly. More organic matter being added to the soil, which means more carbon input. That's the potential positive climate feedback loop we'd hope for.
But, and there's always a but, that's only one side of the ledger.
Precisely. On the debit side of that ledger, you have warmer temperatures. And especially when you pair those with adequate moisture, they drastically accelerate the decomposition processes.
Microbes just go crazy.
They just wake up and get highly active. And this intense activity is sometimes referred to as the priming effect.
Okay, what's that?
It's where the sudden availability of new, easily digestible, carbon-like fresh leaf litter encourages the microbes to start consuming the older, more stable carbon stores that they would normally touch.
So it's like giving them a candy bar, and then they get so energized they start eating a whole pantry.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. So even if the trees are growing faster and dropping more litter, you could potentially decrease your overall carbon storage if that microbial breakdown just outpaces the fresh input. A very delicate high-speed treadmill.
Okay, so that makes sense. And the research from this Hungarian meeting, it looked at oak forests, right? And found something pretty surprising when comparing humid sites to drier ones.
It did. It revealed a truly surprising hypothesis, which, as you said, runs counter to what most of us would just intuitively assume about plants and water.
Which is more water, more plants, more carbon. That's what I would think.
Right. And that's partly true. The researchers hypothesized that, while, higher precipitation areas clearly boost plant biomass and increase the annual litter input,
All right.
that same moisture also enables really rapid decomposition and leaching. So in the drier areas, the idea was that the slowing of those decomposition processes, the lower decay rate, less washing out of soluble carbon.
Right, so the carbon isn't just getting washed downstream.
Exactly. They thought that might actually outweigh the effect of getting less litter production each year.
Wait, hold on. So less rain leads to less decay, which in turn leads to a higher net concentration of soil organic carbon over the long term.
That's the hypothesis.
That feels like a really powerful natural defense mechanism. It gives that dry soil a kind of resilience, an advantage in holding on to its old carbon.
That's the core idea they wanted to quantify. And to do that, they were very careful. They deliberately chose oak forests that had really significant differences in long-term humidity. But, and this is key, they were closely matched on all the other non-climatic factors.
Like what?
Like soil type, the parent material, the rock it came from, the vegetation history. So they isolated the climate signal, which is what makes these biological results so informative.
Okay, so let's get into those results. The specific biological activity comparisons. They used enzyme activity, right, as a proxy for how fast the carbon is being processed.
Yes, because decomposition is, at its heart, an enzymatic process. They focused on two key enzymes. The first one was glucosidase.
And what does that one do?
It's closely linked to organic matter content and the initial breakdown of complex sugars, like cellulose. Now, as you predict, wetter conditions generally accelerate the breakdown of organic residue. Moisture is just optimal for decomposers.
Sure.
But they found no difference in that enzyme's activity between the humid and dry forest soils during the spring and the winter.
So in the cold seasons, it's a wash. It's temperature limited, I guess.
Exactly. Either temperature or moisture was the limiting factor in both areas during those seasons.
But then came the twist in the summer findings. And this is the part where I was genuinely surprised.
This is where that hyperlocalization of the carbon cycle just becomes crystal clear. During the heat of the summer, glucosidase activity was measured at twice the activity in the dry forest soils compared to the humid areas.
Okay, now that seems to completely contradict the whole hypothesis. If the enzyme activity is doubled, shouldn't the decomposition be faster?
That's the immediate pushback, right? It feels like the sign of episodic loss.
Is this that priming effect in action where the microbes are just gorging themselves on available food before the dry season shuts them down completely?
That's what I would think. A big burst of activity before they go dormant.
It definitely suggests a very specific kind of boom and bust cycle. But we have to look at the second enzyme they track to get the full picture, dehydrogenase activity.
Okay, and that one measures what?
Dehydrogenase is a much broader measure. It reflects the total metabolic activity and viability of the microbial community. It's a great proxy for just how much microbial life is active right now.
Got it.
And this activity was higher in the humid forests in spring, but critically, it reversed its trend in the summer, heavily favoring the drier areas.
So in the summer, you see this massive spike in overall microbial metabolism in the dry soils. That points to a really complex, season-specific, rapid burst of activity.
It does.
But if that activity is so intense, why does the overall carbon retention stay higher in those dry sites? That's the piece I'm not getting. And that's the critical piece of the puzzle. It connects directly to the availability and the retention of labile carbon.
Labile carbon being the easy-to-digest stuff?
Exactly. Think of it as the quick energy bar for the microbes. The quantity of this labile carbon, the pool of accessible food, was found to be significantly more significant in the drier oak forest areas than in the humid ones.
So that's the bottom line. Even with that huge seasonal spike in enzyme activity in the dry spots, the fact that a larger pool of active carbon is retained there suggests a couple of things.
Right.
First, that the carbon inputs aren't immediately and completely burned off. And second, that the overall climate-driven shift in decomposition rates is what's really crucial for long-term SOC retention.
That's it. The dry conditions over the course of the whole year, they apply a more effective net break on the total decomposition.
It's a finding that really complicates climate resilience modeling for these temperate forests.
It does. It suggests that while high humidity is great for boosting growth, it also runs a much more efficient, high-speed decay system. Dryness slows the decay just enough over the long term to accumulate a larger overall pool of retained SOC. And that's a vital finding for understanding how certain forest ecosystems might cope with increasing aridity.
That really sets a complex baseline for natural systems. But I have to ask, if even natural systems struggle to hold carbon in wet, optimal decomposition conditions, How much worse is the problem when we're actively disturbing farmland?
That's the perfect transition to our second section. The proof is in the plowing.
Right.
We're moving from forests to agriculture. And we have to start by acknowledging that intensive rotational tillage, what the sources call HM, or traditional heavy cultivation, is widely proven to degrade soil structure.
It just destroys it.
It destroys microbial habitat, and crucially, it depletes that soil organic carbon incredibly rapidly.
Yeah, it's often forgotten that a plow is basically just an aeration device. When you physically turn and churn the soil, you're pumping massive amounts of oxygen into previously protected carbon stores.
And that oxygen injection acts like throwing gasoline onto the microbial fire. It just fuels this rapid breakdown of organic matter into CO2.
Which accelerates carbon loss exponentially.
Absolutely. And this is why having long-term, multi-year data on alternative methods is so important for validating new farming policy. The solution they examined in the research is something called Tillage-Millimouvalase, or TKM.
Which translates to
Conservation tillage.
And we have a phenomenal data set to draw from here. The Dioscol 17-year study. This is not some short 2-year academic trial. This ran from 2003 all the way to 2020 on eroded, clay-alluviated brown forest soil. 17 years.
Exactly. And that longevity lets us move way past any weird transition effects and truly measure the steady state performance. The traditional management, the HM plot, involved yearly deep plowing down to 25-30 centimeters.
Just imagine the energy, the diesel, the time that goes into that, and the complete inversion of the soil layers.
Right. The TKM plot, in stark contrast, was non-rotational, no plow, with greatly reduced surface operations. And crucially, it left a significant amount, about 30% of the surface, covered by crop residue.
And that residue is the armor and the food source for the whole system.
It is. And the results are they're undeniable when it comes to quantifiable carbon gains, particularly in that top layer, that most accessible layer.
Okay, let's look at the headline data. The effectiveness of TKM in that upper 0-15 centimeter depth.
So in that critical zone, the total organic carbon, or TOC, it significantly increased in the TKM plots. It reached 10.29 grams per kilogram of soil.
And compared to the plowed plots?
Compared to a mere 7.74 kilograms in the intensively plowed HM plots. Now, that 2.55 picogram difference, it might sound small to some people.
But when you scale it up to the size of a field, the impact must be massive. Let's put that number into perspective for people listening.
Okay, so when you scale that across a hectare, it translates to a substantial 5.22 tons per hectare increase in organic carbon stock, just in the upper 15 centimeters, because of adopting conservation tillage over those 17 years.
5.22 tons.
Yes. To frame that in common terms, a single hectare under TKM sequestered more than 5 tons of carbon that would have otherwise been released by the traditional HM plowing. Is a measurable, significant environmental achievement. It confirms TKM's role as one of the most potent, ready-to-implement carbon sequestration strategies we have in agriculture.
The conservationists have been saying this for decades, but having 17 years of peer-reviewed data demonstrating a 5.22 ton per hectare advantage, that's incredibly powerful leverage. But, as we saw with the forest system, it's not just about the total quantity of carbon, it's about the health and the activity of the system that it supports.
And that's where the analysis on the label carbon forms comes in. TKM dramatically boosted the active components of the soil. It proved that this stored carbon is contributing directly to soil fertility. It's not just inert matter.
Okay, so how did they measure that?
They looked at a couple of things. Permanganate oxidizable carbon, or POXC, which is highly reactive, people often call it active carbon, that increased by 28.3%. Then they looked at water-soluble organic carbon, or DOC, that's the quick-moving, nutrient-rich, dissolved organic matter, and that increased by 39.4%.
So the system isn't just storing dead carbon, it's creating this highly active, productive bank account of immediately available nutrients. But I saw the microbial impact numbers, and that is truly the most astonishing metric here.
It is indisputably the headline. The microbial biomass carbon, or MBC, that's the actual weight of all the living bacterial, fungal, and protozoan cells in that soil sample. It saw a huge increase of 177.4% in the TKM plots compared to the plowed plots.
177%.
Think about that. You are almost tripling the mass of the living engine that drives the whole ecosystem just by choosing not to plow it every year.
That's a clear sign of a much more hospitable environment. But the researchers also used a more nuanced metric. The microbial quotient, that's the ratio of microbial biomass carbon to or organic carbon, right? The MBC-TOC ratio. What does that tell us about the efficiency of the system?
The quotient tells the story of the system's health and its stability. It was significantly higher in the TKM plots, measuring 1.19% versus a much lower 0.65% in the conventional HM plots. So this isn't just about the quantity of carbon.
It's about the quality of the retention.
Exactly.
How do we translate that difference, 1.19% versus 0.65% for the listener? What does a higher microbial quotient physically represent on the ground?
It implies that the long-term structural and biological benefits of TKM are providing a more favorable, more stable habitat for the microbial biomass. When that MBC-TOC ratio is high, it means the system is storing its carbon more efficiently and more securely. The microbes are happy, they're actively cycling nutrients, but they're also using the carbon efficiently and protecting the rest of the organic matter from rapid loss. The TKM system isn't just bigger, it's healthier and more effective at protecting its stable carbon structure.
Okay, let's connect this back to the other environmental wins beyond just carbon sequestration. We talked about water earlier.
Right, and the structural benefits of TKM were massive for water management. The system drastically reduced runoff by 60 to 70% compared to traditional tillage.
60 to 70%, that's huge.
It's critical for two reasons. First, it prevents erosion, so it keeps soil loss below the tolerable limit. Yeah. And second, crucially, it keeps water stored in the soil profile,
which increases crop yield security during dry periods, which, let's be honest, are becoming more and more common.
Absolutely. The overall carbon sequestration rate from all this was measured at a really robust 0.37 milligram of carbon per hectare per year.
That makes the environmental case pretty much airtight. But for any commercial operator, the ultimate deciding factor is always the wallet, and the research directly addressed this long-term economic question.
They did. They tracked the financial performance over the entire 17 years, and we have to be honest about the initial hurdle here.
Okay.
There was an acknowledged transition phase between 2004 and 2006 where income did dip. And this is typical. The soil biome and structure, they take time to adjust, and farmers often face higher initial weed pressures, or they might need to invest in new, shallower tillage equipment.
So if a farmer sees that initial dip, it requires some pretty significant psychological resilience to stick with the program. What was the reward for that patience?
The reward was substantial and, importantly, stable profitability. Once the system stabilized, the 17-year average resulted in an annual average extra profit of nearly 17,000 Hungarian forints per hectare for the farmer using TKM.
17,000 forints.
That's recurring, reliable extra income year after year after year.
To contextualize that, is that a large enough margin to convince a skeptical neighbor who's terrified of that 2004 to 2006 transition dip?
When you aggregate that over a mid-sized farm, absolutely, that is margin protection. But what's even more important than the average is the robustness they found in the later years. Even between 2017 and 2020, which presented a lot of biological challenges like wireworms, increased weeds, game damage.
All the things farmers worry about when they stop plowing.
The very things, yes. The total profitability of TKM did not decline. It remained stable and superior to the conventional method. The economic case is built right into the environmental benefits. It really shows that soil health is farm wealth.
That 17-year study is it's a gold standard for proving conservation agriculture works, both for the planet and for the bank account. But that brings us to the operational question. How does the everyday farmer or the technician or even a curious land manager, how do they measure and monitor these changes? They can't run a 17-year, multi-thousand-dollar laboratory analysis every season.
And this is exactly why our third section on visual soil assessment, or VSA, is so critical. VSA is designed to be an accessible, practical, and rapid field tool. It was originally derived from FAO, that's the Food and Agriculture Organization material, and it provides a semi-quantitative analysis using equipment as simple as a spade, a knife, and a standardized sheet.
So it's about democratizing soil science, moving it out of the expensive lab and putting it into the hands of people in the field.
That's the goal. Its core purpose isn't to replace high-precision lab science, but to give a farmer a reliable, quick baseline reading, and crucially, to let them track changes in their soil condition and health over time. If they switch from HM to TKM, they need a way to verify for themselves that the structure, the biology, the drainage, that it's all improving year over year.
Okay, so walk us through the process. What are the key indicators that VSA assesses, and how does a farmer physically perform the assessment?
The VSA system assesses 10 core components that reflect physical, chemical, and biological health. You've got texture, structure, porosity, color, earthworms, rooting depth, models, ponding, crusting cover, and erosion.
A whole checklist.
A whole checklist. And the entire process starts with a standardized sample. The farmer digs out a 200 millimeter so an 8-inch cube of soil. They take this block out very carefully to keep its structure intact. Then they can use a knife to look for aggregates and assess the structure against this standardized visual score, or VS, which usually ranges from 0 for poor up to 2 for good.
Okay, let's focus on those physical health markers first, starting with soil structure and porosity. Why is a good structure a VS score of 2 so vital? What does the farmer actually see?
Good structure is characterized by the soil being dominated by what are called friable fine aggregates. Friable just means crumbly. It's easily broken apart with gentle pressure, kind of like a good cake mix.
Right.
And this structure is essential because the spaces between those aggregates are what regulate aeration, gas exchange, water infiltration, and nutrient supply. Yeah. If you score a VS of 0, a poor score, the soil is dominated by very firm, angular clods, massive chunks that are really difficult to break apart, with few or no visible pores. And that just severely restricts root growth, stops water from getting in, and starves the microbial community of oxygen.
And porosity is just a measure of the space within that structure. So if the structure is poor, the porosity is going to be poor too.
Exactly. Poor porosity, where those macropores, the larger channels that roots and worms create, are missing, it restricts drainage and aeration. And this is critical because poor aeration leads to prolonged waterlogging, which creates an anaerobic environment.
No oxygen.
No oxygen. And in the absence of oxygen, certain microbes, they switch their metabolic pathways. And this is what generates potent greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide, N2O, and methane CH4. So the simple act of using VSA to track and keep your porosity score above a 1 is directly tied to both your field's productivity and a climate change mitigation.
That is a direct connection from a visual inspection to global gas cycles. That's incredible. Okay, let's move to soil color. It's an indirect indicator, but a powerful one.
It's the easiest metric to observe. Organic matter is typically dark, so a change in color is an indirect measure of SOC decline. The VSA tool asks the farmer to compare the topsoil color to an undisturbed area. Fine fence line that's never been plowed.
The control sample.
Right. If your topsoil is significantly paler, a VS of 0, it indicates a clear decline in soil organic carbon. And that's a huge red flag.
And just remind us why that SOC is so critical, beyond just being a place to store carbon.
Well, SOC is the glue. It's crucial for stabilizing that structure, for reducing erosion, for providing that crumbly, friable quality we just talked about. And then chemically, it's the major reservoir for vital plant nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur. When SOC declines, the soil's natural fertility just plummets, and the farmer's reliance on synthetic fertilizer inputs increases markedly just to maintain a basic yield.
So the color of the soil is literally showing you the depletion of your natural capital.
It is.
Okay, switching over to the biological indicators. Let's talk about the biological workhorses. Earthworms.
Earthworms are excellent, cost-free indicators of biological health. Their population density is incredibly sensitive to management practices. Heavy tillage, pesticides, herbicides, they all just decimate their numbers.
But in a healthy system?
In a healthy system, they are the essential biological aerators and conditioners. They improve drainage and structure just by burrowing, feeding, and casting.
So how does VSA provide a practical, standardized way for a farmer to count them?
Once the farmer has that 200 millimeter cube sample that they extracted for the structure assessment, they just take the time to carefully break it apart by hand and count every single earthworm they find, adults and juveniles.
Okay.
Then, to get a standard reading that you can compare across farms and over time, you multiply that number by 25. That gives you the count per square meter. The crucial caveat, though, is timing.
You have to do it at the same time every year.
You have to, usually in the spring or fall, to account for those seasonal variations in temperature and moisture that drive them deeper into the soil.
And why is their output, their casts, so critical to fertility?
The casts, their excretion, they are tiny, pre-processed fertility bombs. The worms digest organic matter and soil particles, and they mix it with their own digestive enzymes. And compared with the uningested soil, earthworm casts contain up to 5 times as much plant-available nitrogen, 3 to 7 times as much phosphorus, 11 times as much potassium. And they often have a slightly higher pH, which improves the uptake of many nutrients by the plant.
So a high earthworm count is basically a free fertility system running constantly right beneath your feet.
That's exactly what it is.
Finally, let's look at models. Those orange and gray blotches that can appear in the soil profile. This is the visual indicator for drainage health, right?
Yes, models are a critical diagnostic feature because they assess the drainage and specifically the redox status, the reduction oxidation state of the soil. Redox chemistry is really just a proxy for oxygen availability. When iron is oxidized, meaning it has oxygen, it appears orange or rusty. When it's reduced, lacking oxygen, it appears gray or even bluish.
So, simple rule. Orange means good oxygenation, and gray means the soil is suffocating.
Precisely. If you have a good soil condition, a VS of 2, models are generally absent because water drains quickly and oxygen is constantly replenished. If you hit a poor condition, a VS of 0 new, you see abundant to profuse, meaning more than 50% of the soil mass is covered in medium and coarse orange and, crucially, gray models. And this is a clear critical field sign that indicates chronic water saturation and poor aeration, often caused by a strongly developed hardpan or a plow layer that's restricting water movement.
So the presence of those gray models tells the farmer they have a serious drainage or compaction issue that's holding them back.
A very serious one, yeah. It's restricting root growth and nutrient availability for sure.
The VSA process really underscores how inextricably linked all these things are. Soil structure, drainage, the microbial community. It proves that managing soil health is fundamentally about managing biology.
It is.
And that leads us right to section 4, the role of soil biology in modern management. We're moving beyond just assessment toward actively managing the microbiome.
We have to. Microbial communities are not passive residents. They are the central engine that drives material and energy flows in the soil, which translates directly to plant nutrient supply, carbon cycling, and overall fertility. Intensive agricultural methods with heavy tillage and chemical use, they often create these hostile environments that reduce diversity and function.
And so modern management seeks to reverse this through deliberate biological inputs.
Exactly. And one of the most effective and accessible strategies to enhance the biome is the use of cover crops. The research looks specifically at how different cover crop species exert different selection strengths on the rhizosphere microbiome.
The rhizosphere being that crucial zone of intense biological activity right around the root.
Yes, the rhizosphere is the biological hotspot. The roots, they exude these carbon compounds, and they're essentially bribing and selecting the microbes they want to live there. The study investigated both the resident microbial community using DNA, which tells you who can live there, and the active community using RNA, which tells you who is active right now.
And the findings showed clear species specificity.
Very clear. For example, oilseed radish and borage showed the strongest effect. They had the highest R-squared values on shaping the assembly of all 3 major groups: bacteria, fungi, and protists. Their root exudates are highly specialized, and they drastically shift the type of microbial community that establishes itself compared to just bare soil.
Meanwhile, the classic Poaceae members, the grass family like black oat and hybrid ryegrass, they had a remarkably mild impact on the soil microbiome assembly. So not all cover crops are created equal in terms of this microbial manipulation.
That's a key takeaway. The plant species is performing targeted ecological engineering. For instance, the legumes, so lentil and vetch, they showed a strong stimulating effect specifically on the fungal community.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, lentil's impact on fungi was invariably positive. It stimulated important fungal families like Trichomonaceae and the order Glomerallus. And this is crucial because fungi, particularly those arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, they are the physical conduits for water and phosphorus uptake. They essentially extend the root system of the plant.
That strong fungal stimulation by legumes is a key detail. It connects a really cheap, simple management strategy cover cropping directly to the health of those nutrient scavenging networks that can reduce the need for synthetic inputs.
Okay, moving to more targeted inputs, the research also explored something called aerated compost tea, or ACT.
Right. Compost tea is exactly what it sounds like. It's a liquid extract from high-quality compost, and it's brewed rapidly with aeration to maximize the reproduction of beneficial microorganisms.
And the benefits are, they're manifold. It enhances beneficial bacteria and fungi, obviously. It also improves nutrient availability by rapidly mobilizing those microbes. And when you spray it directly on the foliage, on the leaves, it can act as a biofungicide, covering the leaf surface with beneficial microbes that outcompete and suppress pathogens.
And the research suggested it helps with stress, too.
Yes. The biological components in ACT, the humic acids, the enzymes, the microbes themselves, they may help crops cope better with abiotic stress factors, most notably drought, by improving the plant's stress response mechanisms and its access to nutrients.
There's a practical note here for anyone listening who's interested in applying ACT. The quality of the starting compost is absolutely essential, and you can actually manipulate the microbial output to suit the crop you're growing.
Absolutely. This is where the real knowledge is applied. The original feedstock dictates the fungal to bacterial ratio of the resulting tea. For example, wood chip feedstock has been shown to be necessary to significantly increase the proportion of fungi in the resulting compost.
And if you just use manure,
If you rely only on common farm manure and green waste, you'll tend to produce compost that is heavily dominated by bacteria, which is great for annual crops, but it's less ideal for perennial or tree crops, which really thrive with a more fungal dominant biome.
so knowing your crop's needs, if you're growing cereals, you might want a more balanced brew. If you're growing apples, you want that fungal dominant brew that can dictate your compost recipe. This level of detail about the microbiome, it demands advanced analysis. And the researchers used a sophisticated technique called co-occurrence network analysis to map these interactions.
Right, this analysis treats the microbial community like a massive dynamic social network. It maps the connections, you have nodes representing specific microbial groups, and the edges representing the functional or physical connections between them.
And what did it show?
The analysis confirmed that the rhizosphere is fundamentally a hotspot for these microbial interactions. It showed increased network complexity compared to fallow or bare soil. It was found that vetch, surprisingly, showed the highest network complexity of all the cover crops they tested, reflecting a huge number of potential connections and dependencies within that root zone.
And what's particularly fascinating is who is connected to whom and what those connections imply about ecological function.
The data showed the highest number of connections was between bacteria and protists, followed by connections between bacteria and fungi. And that strong bacteria-protist connectivity is thought to suggest robust ecological processes are happening, specifically predator-prey dynamics.
Okay, let's translate that predator-prey dynamic bacteria and protists into practical fertility for the listener.
Think of it like a tiny necessary food web. The protists are single-celled organisms, the grazers. They actively feed on the bacteria. And this grazing is crucial because bacteria often tie up nutrients like nitrogen in their own biomass.
So they're hoarding it.
They're hoarding it. When the protists consume the bacteria, they excrete the excess nitrogen in a plant-available form. They're essentially pooping out readily available nutrients and kicking the fertility engine back on. This recycling process is a critical function of a healthy, active soil food web, and that high number of connections proves it's working intensely in the rhizosphere.
We've covered a lot of ground climate influence, long-term practice benefits, simple field assessment tools. Now we land on Section 5, which addresses the future of farming, the challenge of precision and digitalization.
This is a timely and critical section because we are currently experiencing this strong global policy push toward precision, data-driven farming. It's being heavily encouraged by initiatives like the EU Green Deal.
And these policies, they mandate reducing fertilizer inputs and maximizing carbon sequestration, which inherently requires high-resolution site-specific data.
It does. But the dilemma is that this rapid policy push has created a bit of a vacuum, and now there's a reliance on digital tools and scanning methods that often lack rigorous scientific validation.
And that's the core issue the researchers identified.
It is. Many of the rapid commercial field survey methods, the soil scanners, the remote sensing tools, the quick analytical techniques, they are simply not validated or standardized across diverse soil conditions. They're essentially sold as black box methods.
You put data in, a map comes out, but you have no idea what happened in the middle.
Exactly. You don't know the underlying algorithm, or if the results even apply to your specific clay-alluviated brown forest soil.
And the researchers warn that using these unvalidated tools risks causing greater economic and environmental harm than just sticking to traditional proven techniques. That is a harsh but really necessary reality check.
It is. If a farmer spends thousands on a precision mapping service based on a faulty scanner, and that map tells them to dramatically reduce fertilizer application in a zone that is actually nutrient poor, the result is lost yield and economic damage. And worse, if the map is just plain wrong, the farmer loses faith in all conservation and precision efforts.
So how did that black box failure manifest in the studies they presented at the meeting?
One study provided specific and pretty damning findings. When they compared several of these quick popular methods, the expensive high-tech sensors, against the actual measured yield potential on a field, these methods showed a very weak, sometimes non-existent, correlation with the actual crop outcome.
So they were basically useless for making decisions.
For decision making, yes.
Okay.
And what's more, you know what performed better?
What?
Simpler variables derived from topographical models like slope, aspect, or elevation, which you can get cheaply and easily, were significantly more useful and more predictive for planning site-specific management zones.
So the expensive high-tech solution performed worse than basic geography and just a good understanding of the landscape.
Right, and the issue is compounded when consultants improperly use geostatistical methods, like interpolating limited points across a large heterogeneous area to create these smooth-looking maps.
That's just adding another layer of error.
It is. Geostatistical interpolation is necessary to turn point data into a continuous map. But if your initial point data from the black box is faulty, or if the soil variability is too high, interpolation doesn't correct the error. It simply multiplies the error across the entire field. The credibility of the entire precision agriculture ecosystem is at risk if practitioners can't trust the fundamental data inputs. We are trying to build the future of farming on sand.
So what's the necessary non-negotiable path forward for the industry, particularly in regions with these highly varied soil and climate conditions?
The conclusion from the scientific community is pretty firm. The holy grail of a single universally effective site-specific management tool simply does not exist yet. It's an engineering fantasy. The urgent requirement is not to go out and buy more sensors, but to standardize and validate the tools we already have.
Tailoring them to local conditions.
Yes, specifically tailoring them to local pedoclimatic conditions, so the local climate, topography, and soil type combination. We have to ensure that the tools we use for precision farming are actually predictive and reliable before we start coupling them to subsidy or policy requirements. Validation absolutely must precede adoption.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into soil science. We've covered huge ground, from the complexity of microscopic enzymatic activity in forests all the way to the hard economic reality of the farm gate. So let's try to synthesize the key takeaways for you.
We really covered three critical areas. First, on climate, we saw that the potential of soil as a carbon sink is it's far more nuanced than just boosting growth. It depends heavily on local climate dynamics, with evidence suggesting that the decomposition slowing effect of dry conditions can actually promote higher net carbon retention in certain temperate forest ecosystems over time.
And second, in agriculture, that long-term data from the 17-year TKM study proved that conservation tillage is not just some theoretical benefit. It is both environmentally powerful, slashing runoff and sequestering tons of carbon, and economically superior in the long run, yielding substantial, stable, extra profit despite those initial inevitable transition challenges.
And finally, we discussed that tools like the Visual Soil Assessment, VSA, are necessary to bridge the gap between high science and practical on-the-ground management. These low-tech validated methods, they empower farmers to monitor key indicators like structure, porosity, and earthworm counts, providing trustable feedback on their conservation success, especially while the high-tech digital tools are still trying to catch up.
And thinking about the future of land management, climate policy, and this necessary transition to sustainable practices, this leaves us with a provocative final thought built on all the interconnectedness we've discussed today.
We saw how variable the effects of climate, tillage, and cover crops are on this highly complex microbial network. The science shows us that general one-size-fits-all recommendations are just insufficient. The real challenge is whether policymakers will embrace the proven low-tech solutions, like VSA and TKM, and trust the stable economic results they provide, or whether they'll continue to mandate unvalidated high-tech black box tools that just confuse farmers, create economic risk, and ultimately undermine our shared goal of maximizing soil carbon sequestration.
So the question isn't whether conservation works, we know it does, and the profit is already there. The real metric of success for the next decade might just be the speed at which science establishes validated, context-specific tool sets, and whether the industry has the wisdom to use the simple, proven methods in the meantime. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.